Keep yourself in the loop of everything football on the Golden State Media Concepts Football Podcast. The latest news on and off the field, be it college football, Big Ten, SEC, Big 12, Pac-12, ACC to the NFL. We've got you covered. Listen to the Golden State Media Concepts Football Podcast.
Welcome into the GSMC Football Podcast, right here on the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Brice Lewis. Welcome into another great show we have for you today, talking about all things football around the league, college and professional. We obviously have news coming out of the league today, also some topics I want to hit on that maybe y'all will be interested in hearing. So, obviously we have all that on the podcast. We have teams unveiling new jerseys. We have, what teams are under the most fire this season to be most successful. Where were certain players signed? Why are certain players not being touched? We'll talk about all that here and more on the podcast as, we're going to come out here, hit it, obviously still during COVID-19. Obviously NFL is hitting their dead period in their off season before training camp coming up pretty soon here. So, probably not too much will happen except maybe a signing here or there, but we'll have to see what happens and how everything turns out at the end of the day. And like I mentioned, teams got new uniforms today, and then both of those teams were the Los Angeles Chargers and the Los Angeles Rams. Both have new jerseys. And let me tell you something, especially on the Rams side. The Twitter memes, the roasting was real. It was a firestorm. People said they look like Best Buy workers, what the Rams do. That's what their uniforms look like. They look like Best Buy workers. And what I noticed from a lot of uniforms this year is that it's not necessarily completely different from what they had, but just the smallest design change. Like you take out a line here, maybe this is more colored in here. It is crazy now how, man, these uniforms don't look that great now. I mean, obviously, I understand they're rebranding because they're at this new, they're in this new arena, new stadium, everything like that, and like, oh yeah, we're trying to stand out, but it's not looking good. It's not looking that great. It's looking kind of crappy if I'm being completely honest with you. So obviously, people have been roasting them for that, obviously, because they're not the greatest looking uniforms. I also agree they're not the greatest looking uniforms. The road, I always say both of these situations, the road uniforms don't look that bad to me. It's mainly the home ones that, with all the colors and stuff, it's just like, what are we doing here? Like, is that the best you can do? If that's the case, you might as well just kept the uniforms from last year. So, obviously, their uniforms weren't really the greatest thing ever in the world. And obviously people let them know that, like, hey, this isn't the best. Like I said, I like the road unis, home unis. I mean, listen, we'll have to see when they get on the field how they look, but initially it doesn't look the best. The Chargers, they have looks like more of a throwback really to what they were wearing with the initial Charger uniforms. Honestly, the Chargers have always had one of the best color coordinations, I feel like, in the NFL. And especially when I always used to love it when they wore the baby blue. The baby blue to me was always such a great uniform with the little the yellow Thunderbolt. It just looked great to me. Obviously, they have the darker blue, then they have like the super dark blue, then they have the white, and then, their uniforms are probably the best out of all of the uniforms. Probably. Like, these are the uniforms, the Charger ones, those are the ones that they hit it spot on, and they did the right thing with the design. So the Chargers, obviously, going into their new arena, are going to be looking very spiffy, very, very good, very, very fire, obviously, because, like I said, it's really hard to go wrong with their uniforms. The Chargers have always had great uniforms to me. So they would have to really try hard to mess it up to have uniforms that people would sit there and be like, well, what is this? So I'm glad that the uniforms, they went well. The uniforms, they did what they had to do with them. And so, obviously, like I said, two ends of the spectrum, Rams getting clowned for their uniforms, Chargers getting praised for theirs. We'll see if that also is the direction of both franchises this season. So, that's obviously the updates on the uniform talk. Obviously now, I believe that's like 7-8 teams now that have changed their uniforms. So obviously, we'll see if any other uniforms maybe get unveiled during this offseason, and these are the last teams to get a change to their actual uniform. I also like to talk about Jadeveon Clowney. Obviously, he's still in the free agent market. People are wondering where he's going to sign. There are reports that he may not sign anything till the summer. Which is fine. There's nothing wrong with that. I mean, the fact that the reason why people worry is because since free agency starts in March, we feel like if you ain't getting picked up within the first week or two, they're going to be on the market for a while. Nobody wants you. It's not that nobody wants you. I think it's just there's certain players you don't want to bring in yet till you kind of see what you build your team to look like through draft and some free agency signings. And then you'll maybe look and be like, okay, well, maybe based off some camps or something, okay, maybe we might want to try to upgrade this position. Let's see if we can bring him in. Let's see if we can help out here at this position, tighten some things up here. Obviously, injuries. And so the question with Clowney is just where will he go and how much money will he get? Because it seems like he will not be getting anywhere close to what he thought he would have got before this offseason. So I think that obviously, you've had teams. They were saying for the longest, Seattle and him always had mutual interest in coming back. It's just Seattle would never go to that number he wanted. And so obviously that was hard for him, and that's why they reported that he probably won't be coming back to Seattle. They said the Titans have been interested in him. They said the Jets have been interested in him. I mean, they've said that teams have been interested in Clowney because Clowney is a talent. He's definitely a starting defensive end who deserves to be on a team. It's not a matter of that. It's just a matter of money. And I understand he's in a situation where he doesn't want to play underneath his value, he feels like, for another season, but he may have to take another 1-year prove-it deal because the biggest knock on Clowney is his pass rushing. He's not a big sack guy. He doesn't get you double digits a year. And you kind of feel like when you view him, there's a bit of a underperformance, there's a bit of a underwhelm because you have all this physical talent to be this dominant defensive end and you're not producing in sack numbers. Now, Clowney's elite against the run. He can set the edge. He makes plays. He affects the game. It's just you want more impact for a pass rush because you're not necessarily paying him to stop the run necessarily. You're paying him to get after the passer. And it's hard to give a guy who doesn't even get maybe 6-7 sacks a year sometimes $20 million to stop the run and maybe give us 5-6 sacks, a couple of it just feels like, I don't know if we want to put that type of money into a position where he's doing that. If Jadeveon Clowney wants to get paid, he needs to come out here and have a 15 sack season. Give me 15 sacks. They'll pay you. Because they're like, okay, now he's doing it. But then you never know. Well, remember, he was on another 1-year prove-it deal. Would that change in terms of his production if he decided to then produce during the 1 year? Because whoever gets him is going to definitely improve their team. Definitely, to me. They're definitely going to improve their team adding a Jadeveon Clowney. It's just a matter of how low is he willing to go. I'm sure whatever number he gets will be shocking to people. And I think Clowney also has to look at, if he is going to take less, well, then which team's going to give me the best chance to be the best me? Because some players are just like, listen, I don't care where I go, as long as I get paid. I don't care if I go here, as long as I get paid. Because they think I'm so great, it don't matter what team you put me on, I'll do my thing. They get the money, and then once they have the money, they feel like, okay, I'm good now. I'm satisfied, and then you may or may not play as hard or whatever, because they got their money. And they feel like, well, I'm talented enough where I don't care. Where some players look at, okay, if I'm on a prove-it deal, I need to go somewhere where I'm going to have the chance to showcase my talent, showcase my skill, and prove to teams around the league that I'm worth a big contract. And that's why I think people always look at Seattle as a great place because, Seattle is a team that, he would be probably the star defensive end. And so, obviously, if the plays are being made in the defensive line, you would think Jadeveon Clowney's the one making those plays, and it will put him in a bigger spotlight and make people be like, okay, he's really good. Tennessee could also be a great fit for him, too, as well. So it's, like I said, it's really one of those things where you really just have to see, and you really just have to look into it and think, what's the best situation for me, to put myself in the best situation to be successful moving forward and on to the future of your Jadeveon Clowney, because you don't want him to, keep himself off a team because of he's wanting so much money. So we'll have to see what happens with them. But that's all we have for this segment. Coming up next, the virtual offseason was extended till May 15th. So that also brings up the question of, will teams actually be able to hit the field in July? All that here and more right here on the podcast.
You really can't underestimate the importance of having the right creative work for your brand or your product. Whether it's a logo, a website, a book cover, or an ad campaign, you really need a quality design to make that big difference pop and deliver your overall engagement and success in a competitive market. That's where Design Crowd comes in. Design Crowd has over 750,000 designers from Sydney to San Francisco ready to help you with awesome creative ideas. They make crowdsourcing work for you. So if you need a logo or you're working on your creative branding, you can go to designcrowd.com and post a brief describing the design you need. And then within about 2 to 7 days, you'll receive up to over 100 different designs from designers around the world. Then you pick the best design and approve payment to the designer. So you're only paying for the design that you want. It takes a lot of the guesswork out of freelancing and out of crowdsourcing. And you don't have to be a huge company like Harvard Business School to use Design Crowd, although they have used it as well. You can start a project on Design Crowd for as little as $99. And if you go right now to designcrowd.com/health and wellness or enter the promo code health and wellness on their website, then our health and wellness listeners will receive up to $150 off of your design project. That's designcrowd.com/health and wellness or entering that promo code health and wellness.
Are you looking for help for your fantasy football team? Check out the GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast. Get today's best advice on who to start, who to sit, even who you should draft. From sleeper picks to red hot lineups, they got it all covered for you. That's GSMCpodcast.com/fantasy-football-podcast. We'll cover traditional leagues, dynasty, PPR, even IDP leagues. When you need fantasy help, there's just one show to hit up. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
Welcome back to the GSMC Football Podcast. Last segment, we discussed the new uniforms that the Rams and the Chargers unveiled. The Rams uniforms were very much praised, very much just, not the Rams. The Chargers were very much praised and very much appreciated and loved by a lot of people. Probably what a lot of people consider the best uniforms in the NFL. And I've always said the Chargers have always just had that great color combination where it's really hard to have ugly uniforms with them. Their uniforms will always be at least pretty good to top in the league in terms of style. And then obviously on the Rams side, they look like Best Buy workers. So good luck with that. Listen, people were questioning the logo. Now you got the uniforms. Everybody's just like, I don't like this change. I don't like this change at all. This branding is not helping their case. But we also talked about Jadeveon Clowney. Where will he end up? Why hasn't he been signed? What's keeping him from being signed? And I discussed just what Jadeveon Clowney might have to do, because he's not going to probably get the money anywhere close to what he wanted, and he's going to have to probably go on another 1-year prove-it deal. So we're going to have to see about how that goes long term. But now we're going to get to some other news. The NFL has extended their virtual offseason until May 15th, which will end here in about a day or so, 2 days. Probably a day, or today, whatever. But this obviously means that they will enter the dead portion of the off season, where obviously, usually there's no really football camps. This is like usually on a normal off season, the last break you have before training camp. Usually it's like you have like that one last month where you have the rest of May, April, and then at the end of July you come in back for the big training camp to get ready for the season. Obviously, that's what's about to happen here. And you gotta look at it too this way. You have, these teams doing virtual workouts, which is basically the coach, hey, get online. This is what I want from you guys. So I want y'all to do and to get yourselves ready. Because right now the NFL is proceeding as if training camp will go on as scheduled until told otherwise by CDC and health officials. Right now, with everything opening up and everything kind of people trying to get back to normal, you're going to see that it might actually be likely potentially for training camp to start on time. Because obviously if training camp starts on time, that means preseason will start. And we don't even know if we will even have an audience, which probably won't be the case, or we won't have a big audience, so to say. So it'll be very interesting to see when the time gets closer to training camp, what the league decides to do and think is like going to work, is acceptable, is fine, and can work for everybody's convenience. Because obviously there is some uncertainty there with the virtual workouts. Some people say they like it, some people say they don't. Obviously, some other training camp related news in the future. Dan Quinn for the Falcons, head coach, has been discussing with the Buffalo Bills and the Miami Dolphins about joint practices, which is a little, okay, can we? Because, obviously, you're already worried about putting everybody back on your team in the same place because of COVID. Now you're saying we're going to practice with other teams with COVID. And I'm sure that they're discussing, can we do it and keep them safe? Because obviously, joint practices was something that potentially people weren't going to do this preseason training camp because of the fact that COVID is around. But it will be interesting to see if they go through with maybe trying to still do, joint practices with the teams they play in the preseason. So, seeing everything that's happening leads me into the question of, what if they can't get on the field in July? This is why it's going to be very interesting to see what happens. Because if they can't get on the field in July, how long before they can? Then how deep into the preseason? Will it be right before the regular season? Will we miss games? It's a big question. It's a big question. A lot of people are trying to figure out what the answer is. What's the right thing to do? What's the right thing in this situation that we are going through? Obviously football is coming back around. Obviously this is America's number one sport. So obviously a lot of people are looking very much forward to the NFL season coming back. Also through this crisis to help distract us from real life and what's going on. So there's a lot riding on the NFL coming back. But obviously they're going to make decisions for them and what's best for the league and the players, because you don't want to bring players back and the players start contracting COVID. Because if that happens, they're going to shut everything down and say, yeah, we're going to have to cancel for a bit because we got to rethink everything. And just in case you were wondering what's happening with college football as well, I believe they said they needed at least a 3 to 6 week period to be able to let teams train together. I honestly, college could be the first domino to fall, because if college teams and schools start to allow players to come back to campus to practice, they have bigger rosters than the NFL roster. And you could say they have more people on a field at one time, in an area at one time, especially if the college students come back. So you could potentially say if college can get back on the field, then NFL can get back on the field, even though both leagues are not necessarily dictated off each other. Because there's a very strong possibility you could have an NFL season and NFL games and no college games. Because they're running differently. Because they have to run differently because that's a college with college students, not just the student athletes. And then you have the NFL, which outside of the people in the organization, their teammates, they're not really interact with other people on a daily basis outside of friends and family. So in those situations, you're kind of trying to figure out what exactly is going to be the right move, so to say, on both ends. If there's no training camp, like I said, it's going to start raising questions. So when will you allow them to practice? When will you allow them to play? I think the league has precautions in place because clearly, they're not just going to start training camp and nobody get tested. They're probably going to test everybody to make sure everybody's good. Like, okay, is any player coming here that got the virus? So we know, okay, listen, we're going to need to isolate you away from the team. It would be better in that situation in that way because you could then isolate him from the team, and as long as nobody gets it, you could still go about your training. It's just if you get it while training camp is going on, now it's like, all right, now we don't know who's been in contact. Could they all have it? Could the people who did joint practices have it? Could everybody who's been around them have it? And then it's going to create a lot of panic within one team, which is going to create panic within other teams if you played a game or a joint practice. Now they're wondering, does anybody on our team have it because of him? And that trickle-down effect is what's going to create a shutdown in the NFL if that happened. But they will have probably tests ready and available for any team, all 32 teams, for all players, all staff, all personnel, so they can make sure that they're on top of this because obviously, there's, like I said, there's a lot of dominoes that could fall here. If the NBA comes back, that might be a sign. Well, if the NBA could do it, why can the NFL do it? If college is able to get back on the field, that's another big sign. If they can do it, why can the NFL do it? Because it'll be very interesting to me to see how things kind of turn out and how things end up going when it comes to this decision they make about, okay, is it safe enough for them and all the teams around the league to have training camp? And obviously then teams have to figure out where's the best place to have training camp. But that's all we're going to say on that. Coming up next, we're going to talk about why teams are weary about signing Cam Newton and people expect Deshaun Watson to get a monster contract before Patrick Mahomes. All that right here and more on the podcast.
You really can't underestimate the importance of having the right creative work for your brand or your product. Whether it's a logo, a website, a book cover, or an ad campaign, you really need a quality design to make that big difference pop and deliver your overall engagement and success in a competitive market. That's where Design Crowd comes in. Design Crowd has over 750,000 designers from Sydney to San Francisco ready to help you with awesome creative ideas. They make crowdsourcing work for you. So if you need a logo or you're working on your creative branding, you can go to designcrowd.com and post a brief describing the design you need. And then within about 2 to 7 days, you'll receive up to over 100 different designs from designers around the world. Then you pick the best design and approve payment to the designer. So you're only paying for the design that you want. It takes a lot of the guesswork out of freelancing and out of crowdsourcing. And you don't have to be a huge company like Harvard Business School to use Design Crowd, although they have used it as well. You can start a project on Design Crowd for as little as $99. And if you go right now to designcrowd.com/health and wellness or enter the promo code health and wellness on their website, then our health and wellness listeners will receive up to $150 off of your design project. That's designcrowd.com/health and wellness or entering that promo code health and wellness.
Check out the show that's built on the MMA. From the UFC to extreme cage fighting, they got the fights covered. Check out the GSMC MMA podcast. Get the latest news on past or upcoming fights. Join us as we talk to and about some of the biggest names in the MMA, past, present, and future. When it's the fight game, there's just one show to check out. GSMCpodcast.com/MMA-podcast. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
Welcome back to the GSMC Football Podcast. Last segment we discussed with virtual offseason coming to an end in the NFL by May 15th. What will happen for this next dead period of no workouts for the most part until training camp? And will there be a training camp? And what will happen if there isn't a training camp? Because obviously the NFL now is facing one of the most crucial times in their league history with Corona on what will be the state of the world and what will the health officials say, and et cetera, when it comes to opening training camp and still having teams report testing, all of that to make sure that everybody can stay safe while also trying to get ready for the season coming up in the fall. But now this will transition into this segment, and we will talk about Cam Newton. Cam, Mr. Newton. So the report out there is teams are weary of signing Cam Newton because of his injury history, because of the injuries that he has suffered, and people wonder if basically is his body broken down where if we bring him in and try to get him to start, he can't last. That is one reason why teams have not gone after Cam. Obviously, last week we reported that first he didn't want to be a backup. Now he's okay with being a backup. Now we're hearing from the teams, well, we don't know if he can stay healthy. We don't know if we can trust his injury history. We don't know if we think he can go out there and play every game that we need him to play without getting hurt. Obviously, people expect Cam at his height, Cam when he's healthy, Cam when he's 100% to be the old Cam, the MVP Cam, one of the best quarterbacks in the league Cam. That's what you expect. But obviously people just don't know if they're ever going to get that Cam again. Obviously also Cam is 31, so he's getting a little, in quarterback years, with quarterbacks now, that's not really old, because technically he could have another decade in him. But in terms of his type of quarterback, especially with his running and stuff, how much longer will Cam even be in the league? Some people might even start to ask. So, Cam, I think Cam is a guy who is probably one of the most underappreciated quarterbacks. I think people look at some of the stuff he does off the field because he's a very flamboyant personality. He's very out there. He's very social. He's very he's not afraid to tell you what he thinks. And a lot of people don't like him because of that. And so I think that may be one of the reason why maybe fans are not clamoring for Cam. But if you actually look at Cam, the talent, he's better than probably half these quarterbacks that are playing or even backing up their current quarterbacks. So that's one of the biggest things. You always have that discussion with Colin Kaepernick years ago. You got quarterbacks getting signed that are not better than him, but just because of what he decided to do, they won't sign him. And so some people think that's similar. Cam is better than probably half these quarterbacks that y'all put in these positions, but y'all won't sign him because he's a little flamboyant. And also, Cam's one of those guys with his infectious personality. If he's playing for your team, you might love Cam. And so there's going to be that pressure. It's almost like when Tebow was in the league. And when Tebow was a backup, he has that following. So if the quarterback in front of him struggles, there's going to be people wanting him to come. There's going to be people wanting him to play. There's going to be people wanting him to be on the field and be the quarterback that's leading the team. So, with all of that, clearly that's going to put them in a very interesting position. So some teams may not want to deal with that. And I think the injuries, I understand. But listen, if you are signing Cam to be a backup, I don't think injuries should be your concern. Your concern, because listen, at least you'll be able to have him in-house, see how he looks, see how his body looks. Obviously you could play him in preseason, see how he holds up. If everything looks fine, then it's like, okay, we got a solid backup guy. And then you never know. I'm sure teams call each other like, hey, so how was Cam? Was he good? Was he struggling? Was he look unhealthy? Did he not look the same? And then you may be like, yeah, he looked fine. And then you might go, okay. And then you might report back to your team and be like, all right, guys, we might not need to be scared of maybe potentially taking a flyer on Cam Newton. He seems healthy to me. People are saying he's healthy. Why not go out and see if maybe this is a guy we can bring into our franchise and potentially lead our franchise for a few years? Usually you don't try to find franchise quarterbacks at 31. So at best, some people may look at Cam as a bridge, a guy who you can maybe keep up there for 2-3 years and maybe bridge into another guy potentially because of his age, depending on how well he plays, obviously. But obviously with Ryan Tannehill having success he had, there's always that it could be another Ryan Tannehill type of situation where, just if injuries or the quarterback in front of you struggles, getting the opportunity could put him into a spotlight to now really show his stuff and then prove that he can really play in this league and be one of the better quarterbacks in the game. Which I think we shouldn't rule it out with Cam. I think Cam's done a lot for this game. And I think it'll be interesting to see if Cam could ever get back to what Cam was. And then switching to this, people are expecting Deshaun Watson to get his contract before Patrick Mahomes. And honestly, I'm not surprised. I expect this because I think a lot of people would still take Patrick Mahomes over Deshaun Watson. And so obviously, it's going to be like a battle here. If Patrick got his contract, well, the agent for Deshaun's going to be like, well, we're just as good, if not better, in our minds than Patrick, so we want more, and vice versa. So, but either way, they're going to get monster deals. So it won't be a matter of, I didn't get paid enough. It's just trying to see where the market is. Really, because one of them have to set the market for each other. People have been saying that they expect Patrick Mahomes to get a $200 million contract, which would be unprecedented in the NFL. So it will be interesting to see if what the numbers look like for Deshaun if he gets the contract first. Because, Houston, listen, if Bill O'Brien stays against GM, he should know you can't shortchange your quarterback like you shortchange any position on this roster. Because if you shortchange Deshaun Watson with the trades that you have made, the cuts you have made to some of their best players, how do you honestly expect Deshaun not to get disgruntled and say, you know what? I might want to leave. That obviously is something that you got to keep in mind. Obviously, these two quarterbacks are going to be meeting on opening day of the NFL season if the season starts on time and the first game of the NFL regular season. So obviously that's going to be always a great matchup on paper. Sean and Patrick Mahomes in the same draft. Both guys have been franchise quarterback saviors for their franchise. And Deshaun's looking to someday have the same success Patrick has had. So obviously that's going to be a very, very big deal. So, to me, it's just going to be very interesting to see what happens with that deal. Because you're going to see some big money tossed around. And maybe that's why Dak also wants a certain money. Because he's like, I don't want my money to be that far obsolete from their money. and just listen. The only thing that might change now with COVID, since the salary cap will probably go down, is that money won't be as big, so you might potentially see Patrick and Deshaun not get the same monster deals they would have gotten if they never had COVID hit and the salary cap maybe potentially could have went up again. Obviously, like I said, the salary cap will go down, so we'll have to see if the teams are even going to have the ability to pay these guys the type of money that they even want in the NFL because of COVID-19 and the impact it's going to have on the revenue that the league makes this year and all the teams make. So it'll be very interesting to see what ends up happening when it all gets down to it and all set in stone. So we'll have to see how it ends up and how it goes. But coming up next, which teams are on the hot seat under the most pressure to win for both head coach and team performance? All that right here and more on the podcast.
Check out the show built around the women of MMA. From the UFC to the extreme cage fighting, we got the fights covered.
Listen.
It's the Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast. The latest news of upcoming fights, discussions of previous matches. Join us as we talk to and about the biggest names in women's mixed martial arts, past, present, and future. When it's the women's fight game, you know where to listen to. The Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast.
Welcome back to the GSMC Football Podcast right here on the GSMC Podcast Network. Yes, sir. So last segment we talked about Cam Newton. Obviously, some teams are weary of picking up the 31-year-old quarterback because of his injury history. Some people wonder if Cam's body has broken down too much on him, and that makes teams a little scared to pick him up, especially if they needed him to become the starting quarterback because they don't know if Cam can make it through a season. So obviously that's something that we'll have to keep an eye on, see if anybody calls or contacts Cam Newton to see if any news or rumors come out potentially during the situation that's going on. Also, we also talked about how Deshaun Watson is expected to get the major contract before Patrick, which will probably set the tone for Patrick Mahomes' contract, because one of them has to set the ceiling for how much the other one's getting. Both are in the range of potentially getting $200 million potentially for both of their franchises, because they're going to break the bank and reset the whole quarterback market once again. So obviously that's going to be big news whenever that happens. Obviously both players are due next year to get a new deal, so it'll be interesting to see who actually gets the deal done. But, so, now we're going to talk about teams that are on the hot seat. Teams that currently are in jeopardy of potentially, if they have a less than successful season, coach fired, start over, team disappointment, everything. One of the first teams in my mind that stick out is the Atlanta Falcons. Obviously, the Falcons have started off not the best the last 2 years and have finished strong, but obviously 7-9 records are not going to get it done, especially with the talent that Atlanta has, and that's why those end of the seasons are very frustrating for fans, it's very frustrating for the owner, it's very frustrating for everybody, because you're beating some of the best teams, but you're not even in playoff contention. And with the talent, it makes sense for you to be in playoff contention and compete with those teams. Obviously, people have said coaching has been an issue, inconsistencies, injuries, things like that. Dan Quinn probably is entering a year where basically this is, we said last year this was his last year. This year is his last year. There's no way Arthur Blank will keep Dan Quinn again if they start off 0-4. I just don't see it happening. So the Falcons basically have to win this year and at least be in contention to make the playoffs. Listen, with 7 playoff spots, if they could get to 9-7, that might be good enough to get them in. So I feel like Arthur Blank really just wants them to get in. The only problem is that a lot of the fan base in Atlanta has kind of turned against Dan Quinn and Thomas Dimitroff. So even if they get in, they're like, oh, we got to deal with them another year. They were only 9-7. It wasn't even like they did a great. It's one thing if we're 13-3 number 1 seed, because then it's just like, wow, they really flipped it. They flipped the table. They perform better. They coach better. Team play better. Okay, he's deserving of another year. 9-7, you're still going to have people being like, I don't know. I'm not sure. So, obviously, he's under a lot of pressure. Because like I said, with the talent Atlanta has, they are still, to me, one of the better rosters in the league. They have talent at almost all the levels. It's just a matter of putting it all together and getting consistency on both sides of the ball. And when they get consistency, they could take that next step and then get back into where they used to be back in 2016 and even 2017 when they made the playoffs. Another team that's currently on the hot seat right now is the Chicago Bears. Obviously, Chicago's on the hot seat because, listen, Mitchell Trubisky looks like he's out the door. Matt Nagy lost last year. And again, Chicago's one of those teams that have a lot of talent, especially on the defensive side. I'm sure the GM and the owner is expecting, especially the owner, is expecting them to be good. With the talent they have, they should be able to compete. They traded for Nick Foles. People are projecting Nick Foles to start over Mitchell Trubisky because they feel like they traded for him to be the starting quarterback. So, especially with the money they're having to pay him because they're still paying him what the Jaguars gave him last year. So, with that being said, Chicago's under a lot of pressure to win. I'm sure the Chicago fan base does not want to be in a situation where they're losing again with the talent that they have and just still having that turntable at quarterback. If you've always thought about Chicago, maybe outside of Jay Cutler, maybe, they've really never had a quarterback, really, for a long time. Chicago has always been a team, for as long as I've watched football, and have never had a solid quarterback for 8 years. Like I said, the closest player to that was Jay Cutler. Outside of that, they've had guys who maybe played good for a year or played decent. A lot of stopgap guys, but nobody ever solid. Mitchell Trubisky was supposed to be the guy, and he hasn't been. He has not been the guy at all. So, obviously, they're probably looking to move on. Now, obviously, either two things can happen. This season is a complete failure and a train wreck, and they get up and get Trevor Lawrence or Justin Fields. Or they have a good season, and Nagy keeps his job. Foles plays well, he keeps his job. Or, in a more dramatic storyline, Trubisky is able to retain or get back into the starting lineup and actually have the season that people have been waiting for. If he can look more like 2018 Trubisky instead of 2019 Trubisky, Trubisky can stay in the league and stay maybe potentially the quarterback of the Chicago Bears, even though they already declined his fifth-year option. So obviously that's something that is going to be looked at, obviously. Pressure, obviously. And they're also in a division that is, they're good, but it's not like one of the top divisions in football. So, and you could say they probably have a top 2 defense in that division. It's just offensively they have to be more than sufficient for them to really make a run. Another team that's on the hot seat to me, the Jets. The Jets, obviously, it feels like because it's in New York, you already have that pressure. It's New York. There's already that pressure there because of that. You're in New York City. You gotta win. You can't not win. You are in the city of New York. We need production. We need to produce. We need, winning everything now. So, clearly that's obviously a big thing. And, with knowing that, they, with Adam Gase, he's under a lot of pressure. Didn't have a great first year. Looks like some fans are souring on Adam Gase. Obviously seeing what happened in Miami and then seeing what's happened his first year with the Jets, people are kind of souring on him a little bit. Sam Darnold, I think he'll get another year regardless, unless he just has a terrible year. Because he hasn't necessarily had a bad year, so to say, in the league. He's had mediocre or decent years. Last year was a good year, I would think. Because, he had mono. Came back, didn't play well. They played better when he came back. So, and that's with a beat-up offensive line and not the greatest receiving core in the world. So, to me, I view them as a team that, especially in the AFC East, that's so wide open this year, it feels like if the Jets can make that jump, it's going to definitely help them moving forward and moving into the long term with the success of their franchise and just with stability that they haven't had maybe since the Rex Ryan, Mark Sanchez days in the early 2010s. And the last team I think is also on the hot seat this year is the Indianapolis Colts. Obviously, listen, they came off of this disappointing year last year. Frank Wright is in a year where you basically are saying we think Philip Rivers can get us to where we want to go. They may have drafted Jacob Eason, but it doesn't mean that by the time Jacob Eason steps on the field, he'll be there. And that's going to be representative of what happens this season. Because the Colts have a lot of talent on this team. This is probably one of the better rosters, again, in the league. Offensive line, have 2 running backs now. I drafted you a receiver. Defensively, they've built their defense is much more solid than winning. Because remember, Indianapolis has never been known as a great defensive team. Even during all the Peyton years, it was always their elite offensively and at least best average defensively. Now, you know what I'm saying? Both sides of the ball are pretty good. It's just putting it all together and making that run towards the playoffs because they have a certain style of football they want to play, and they feel like that style of football can get them to where they want to go at the end of the day and get them to where they think they should be. So obviously that's going to be a big thing. And, basically going from there and hoping for the best. But that's all we have here for this segment. And because those are the teams that I think are going to be on the hot seat this year. Coming up next, what makes a good football team from the top down? Find out all that here and more on the podcast.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Welcome back to the GSMC Football Podcast. Last segment, I discussed with you guys which teams that I thought, I've mentioned about 4 teams that I thought were on the hot seat next year. Obviously, head coaches are all on the hot seat. Obviously, just in terms of team expectations, because there's player implications. Like I said, Colts don't win, Rivers struggles, he'll be out. Bears, if Foles or Trubisky don't work, they'll be out, plus Nagy. Falcons don't work out, Quinn is out. Jets, they don't do well, Gase is out. I think that's pretty self-explanatory for all those situations. Someone's leaving after this year. There is no year for they either have to win, make the playoffs, unless, let's say you have an anomaly year and you go 10-6 and happens to be AFC or NFC is really good and everybody's 10-6, so then you don't make it. Then it's like, okay, well, you went 10-6, I can't necessarily fire you for that. Or else everybody's gonna look, you're gonna fire a 10-6 coach. It's like Jim Caldwell. Man went 10-6, got fired. Like, huh? Like, I never knew you could do a good job and get fired. So, obviously, that's going to be very interesting to see those teams in action and how their season progresses throughout the regular season this year. But now I'm going to discuss with you guys what creates a good football team from the top down. So I'm going to talk about owner, front office, scouting personnel, player personnel, GM, head coach, because we're going to really focus on that. It's easy to talk about players and how to build a team. That's his own segment, how to build a team. But I'm talking about from a management perspective, how to create a great team from the top of management to the bottom of management. So obviously the owner is the first part, is the top level. Now most owners, in general, sports in general, are not always necessarily familiar or the biggest football, basketball, however experts. Sometimes you have a guy who made a lot of money doing something else that just said, you know what, let me own a football team. So they don't necessarily know all the implications that go into running a team, how to create a great team, because that's not their job. They're the owner. They're just funding the team. They're funding the organization. Right? So sometimes with owners, I've always said the best approach is to just make sure you try to give the coaches and the players the best facilities that you can give them. Give them any resource that they need to be successful. Make sure that you have extensive staff to fill every need and hole. Don't be cheap and try to say, hey, we need you to do 3 things for us. Give everybody their own specific job so everything is more constructive and easier to deal with. And then just, like I said, then just sit back and see what happens. I feel like the best GMs do that. Like, think about the Patriots. Robert Kraft has always done what he needed to do to put the Patriots in position to win. Usually, even though and Robert Kraft is an example of, he hired a guy who he saw could take us to the next level from Bill Belichick, and said, you know what, Bill, I trust you. I'm going to give you the power that you need to control this team till we win. And then if you need anything else from me, just ask me and we'll look into it. And that's why the Patriots have always been so good. Because you had that good management. Because you really think if the Patriots had bad management, that the Patriots would be as good as they are? Like, realistically. You might be one of those situations where, since you have such a great coach and great team and a great quarterback, you can get past the bad management. But you never know. Think about the Jimmy Garoppolo thing. Bad management would have said, you know what? Screw you, Belichick. You're out of here after this season. Or say, Brady, you're out of here. And then those seasons would have never happened the way they happened. So obviously, to me, an owner is a very important part of the team. Because if they give you what you need to be successful, then you do it. Obviously, you've heard from Cincinnati, their GM's kind of cheap. You're the GM and the owner. That's a big no in my book. Don't try to be a personnel person if you're the owner. That is, unless you basically grew up in the ranks of coaching and personnel and then somehow just found a bunch of money to buy a team, don't try to be the GM. Owners so bad want that credit and success to say, I built this team. I have an eye for talent. I have the money to fund this franchise and make them big, but also give the talent they need to win. And then you just don't work. You've seen it in Dallas with Jerry Jones. Jerry Jones was successful with Jimmy Johnson, but he didn't like the fact that everybody was giving the credit to him. And ever since he got rid of Jimmy Johnson, the Cowboys have never really been the same. They've had some good teams, but they've never had playoff success. Jerry Jones is still trying to get that one Super Bowl, that one successful season to say, I built this team. It was all because of me. I'm the reason why they're good. That's why he doesn't hire like top flight head coaches, because they're going to give the credit to him instead of him. You don't want those situations. You want an owner who's going to say, tell me what you need. I'll give you what you need. I'll put what we need to put in place. And I trust everybody else I've hired, especially my GM, my PV player personnel, and head coach to run everything that they need to do to be successful and put a product on the field that will please the fans. That's the first step. Second step, obviously, is the GM. Because, think about it. Obviously, he's the guy who, depending on the system and the structure, works with the head coach. Some guys are like, listen, I'll control who we bring onto the team. You just coach him. But, obviously, you give an input into what we need, and I'll go look for it. Why do you think most GMs, a lot of people want GMs who are scouts? Because they've already went through the grind of going through scouting and trying to find gems. And if this certain scout has a good track record of getting good players, you feel like, man, if we put him at GM, it's basically a more glorified scouting role. Except now you're dealing with some salary cap and you're dealing with the team and how you want to build it and the breakdown. And honestly, if you have that type of relationship where you have a good, keen eye for talent, or you have a guy who works with the head coach very extensively, which is usually how it goes. That's why you always see on draft days, it's always the head coach and the GM working together talking about who they want. You have scouts to give you opinions, and then you have the two main decision makers there saying, okay, so based on what this team is and what we are, What do we need? What needs to happen? What is the thing that needs to be for us to be successful? That's obviously the next step. You know, because you don't want to be in a position where someone's trying to take, like I said, it's always this responsibility. You've seen it in Houston. Bill O'Brien, and I think the last general manager was Rick Smith, I believe, got into it, didn't come eye to eye on certain personnel decisions. Rick Smith lost. Bill O'Brien won. He was fired. Bill O'Brien's now the GM of the Houston Texans, and people hate him. So, I mean, listen. You don't want that type of situation. You need two people who work together and can put their egos aside and say, what can we do to create the best team possible? If you can do that, you'll be good to go. And then lastly, obviously, the head coach. You need a guy who, depending on the type of team you want to build. That's why sometimes with the GM and with the owner, there's a certain aura you want around the team. There's a certain philosophy you want. Do we want to be an alpha male team? Do we want to be a physical team? Do we want to be a Showtime type of team? You want to establish a culture, and that's what the head coach is there for, to establish a culture, to establish a certain style of play. Because you don't want to sit here and establish this style of play that won't work. You don't want that. You never would want that. Why would you ever want a style of play that wouldn't work for the team? So let's say, you usually see it in the league. Like, let's say you just hired a defensive head coach and you fired him. Usually you think, okay, we tried defensive head coach, specialty defense. Obviously, we're going to go offense. And also it depends on how the team did. You hired a defensive guy. They sucked defensively. Okay, let's hire an offensive guy. And let's see if he can bring a defensive coordinator to fix the defense. Or vice versa. We hired an offensive guy. Offense sucked. Okay, let's hire a defensive guy. See if he can find an offensive coordinator to get the offense ready. It'd be literally, you got to find what do we need for this team, what's going to work. Obviously, right now, we're in this mode of trying to get the young head coach who's still younger than some of the players, because we feel like if you can relate to the players more and be on their level more, they might play harder for you, and then you may be able to get to them more than a guy who's 50, 60 at this point and still has some of the old way in him, even though there is a new way that's happened now. So obviously there's a lot of things that go into it, and it's going to be very interesting to see what happens moving forward. But those are my steps and what I think you need to do to build a team from the top down, from an organizational standpoint, and how to create a successful team. But coming up next, we're going to rank and talk about Bleacher Report's list for the top 5 Rookie of the Year offensive candidates right here on the podcast.
This is your ultimate stop for everything sports. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Should I say more? From the NFL, MLB, the NBA to MMA, it's all in here. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Listen now.
Welcome back to the GSMC Football Podcast. Last segment, I discussed from the top down organizationally what we need to create a successful team. Obviously, I talked about the owner, the GM, and the head coach. Discussed each level and said, this is what you need for the team to be successful. This is what you need for the team to be able to do what they need to do to be able to put the best product on the field, have the best relationships in the front office, and do what you need to do to put every team and every part of your organization in the best position to be successful and to do their job to the best of their ability, so that way you can produce a great product on the field and to the fan base and make money out of the expectations that you may have set for the season because you have such a great product on the field. But this segment now, we're going to talk about 5 offensive rookie of the year candidates that Bleacher Report has listed, and I'm going to discuss each of them and what I think of each when it comes to the rookie of the year running. So the first person they have on the list is Clyde Edwards-Helaire. Obviously drafted at the end of the first round by the Kansas City Chiefs. Obviously Clyde Edwards has been a guy who, you watched him at LSU last year, one of the most underrated running backs, but also people look at as one of the best running backs at the same time. And people say when he got drafted at Kansas City, it was the most perfect fit because of his skill set and what he does will give them such a dynamic running back. Him and Damian Williams, I think, will help create a running duo that's going to be very hard to stop in Kansas City. And it's not even necessarily because they want to be able to run the ball 30 times to get 150 yards. It's just literally because they can beat you for 18 carries and maybe 90, 80 yards, maybe 100 yards, and then still get you out 5, 6, 7, 8 receptions out of the backfield, 10 receptions between both. So that's really almost 30 touches almost a game to both running backs and make their offense that much more dynamic and make you have to defend everyone on the field because obviously Kansas City has such a plethora of weapons. You can't just focus in on one person. You got to sit there and be like, okay, hold on. Obviously, this team has a lot of talent. You think you got to guard Sammy. You got to guard Tyreek, and you got to guard Mecole Hardman. You got to guard Travis Kelce. Then you got to guard Clyde Edwards. And it's just like, oh my God, there's not enough people on the field that we can guard. So obviously that's going to be a player who could have a big season in that system. You know, he could have a huge season in this system and in this offense. So this is obviously a great reason why he definitely could be in the running for Offensive Player of the Year as a rookie. Number 4 on the list, Justin Herbert. Now, Justin Herbert, I think the key to his situation is obviously when does he play? When do they say, okay, Tyrod, time to come out, Justin come in there, and then how does he play? Obviously, he's the third quarterback in this draft. People think he's third best. People think he's the third best prospect in terms of the Offensive Rookie of the Year candidates in terms of quarterbacks. He's always been third in everything. You know, he has an NFL-ready arm, has 4 years of starting experience. There's some things that people didn't like or felt like he should have improved during that time, which is maybe why they knocked him a little bit. And let's not forget, 2 years ago, or almost a year ago, Herbert was looked at as maybe potentially battling Kyler Murray for the number 1 spot in the NFL draft as a quarterback. So we don't need to sit here and look at this like, oh, he's not that good. But Justin Herbert, like I said, from a team perspective, obviously from the running back perspective, Clyde Edwards has the best team. But from a quarterback perspective, he has the best roster around him. So he was thrust into action. He has the most talent around him to be successful instantly. If he has what it takes, which then obviously if he ends up playing well with the talent he has, will then put him in position to win Rookie of the Year, especially if he came in there and led the Chargers to the playoffs or something. Obviously, that's a big accomplishment for a rookie, so obviously that's going to be a big deal. So obviously that's something that, you know, is going to be very crucial moving forward for him. And just trying to produce and do what he has to do to be the best he can out there in the league. Next up on this list, Tua Tagovailoa, Miami Dolphin quarterback, drafted 5th overall. Obviously, he's probably the biggest wild card I think everybody wants to see this year because, again, it's the question with Herbert. When will he play? Will he start week 1? Can he beat out Fitzpatrick from day 1? Are they comfortable playing him coming off the injury week 1? And not having the same maybe extensive camp that he might have that he didn't get with some of the offseason programming and everything. If he can play and start right away, he definitely has the potential, if he is what they think he can be, a chance to be Rookie of the Year. Tua has always been looked at as probably one of the most also franchise-ready quarterbacks in terms of playing instantly if he wasn't hurt. You know, he put up big numbers in college, didn't really turn the ball over, get big yardage. His production should translate to the NFL, and he also has the improvisational ability that a lot of teams want in a quarterback now. You know, listen, he has some weapons. Devontae Parker, a lot of people don't realize, Devontae Parker had a career year last year. He had over 1,200 plus yards and 9 touchdowns. So Tua, you know, he's put in position in Miami, even though they're kind of going through a slight rebuild still, to be in position to really take the league by storm and be that next franchise quarterback phenomenon that Miami has been desperately missing since Dan Marino, and just to add to the ranks of great young QBs coming into the next generation of quarterbacks in the entire NFL, as obviously you see that shift in quarterbacks in the league. So it'll be very interesting to see what happens with Tua. Next up on their list at number 2, Jonathan Taylor, running back, Indianapolis Colts. Obviously, a lot of people feel like when the Colts made this pick, this was probably one of the best selections that they've made in years, ever since Andrew Luck. Because what is the strength of the Indianapolis Colts right now? Their offensive line. They're probably one of the best blocking offensive lines in the league, especially run blocking. Jonathan Taylor is a big play back. Him and Marlon Mack will complement each other seamlessly. And Jonathan Taylor could be in for a very, very big year because of it. Now listen, he was a workhorse at Wisconsin. He could be a workhorse in the league. Obviously, he won't have to necessarily be again with Marlon Mack there. But just the production that he can probably give the Colts this year will be big time. Because obviously, if he can put up big numbers and play a very big role moving forward, then why can't Jonathan Taylor be in the Rookie of the Year discussion? If the Colts have a great year, he will, to me, be a very big part of why they have a great year and what could be putting them in contention to potentially make the playoffs and maybe make a sneak run in the AFC this year in terms of making the playoffs and making a run inside of the playoffs and really making everything they've done and all the trades and money and the building and development they've done these last 2-3 years worth it because they're trying to win now. So Jonathan Taylor would be a very big part in that. A very big part in that. So, and then obviously, number 1 on the list is Joe Burrow from the Cincinnati Bengals. Obviously, it's because he's playing right away. You know he's starting. I've told people before, Burrow has a pretty good group of wide receivers. AJ Green, if he can become anywhere where he used to be, number 1 guy. T. Higgins, the future probably of the wide receiving core as a number 1 is on there. Tyler Boyd, a very, very good wide receiver, has had 2 back-to-back 1,000-yard seasons. You got 3 guys. Then you got Joe Mixon, who nobody talks about, but Joe Mixon is actually one of the better running backs in the AFC. Nobody talks about Joe Mixon because the Bengals have been bad, but he's one of the better running backs. He's had 2,000-yard seasons. So, and then they're also getting Jonah Williams, their 2019 pick, back on the line. So if the offensive line can improve and the weapons stay healthy, Burrow has a great chance of being Rookie of the Year if he is really as good as people say that he is coming out of this draft. And that's all the time we have for you. Thank you for listening in to the GSMC Football Podcast. Don't forget to listen to our other amazing podcasts here on the GSMC Podcast Network. Don't forget to follow us on social media. Don't forget to leave a review and comment. Please stay safe out there, guys. Thank you for tuning in.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Football Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.